Well, welcome back everyone to session 2. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge as well the traditional owners and custodians of the land on which we meet and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. Before we begin with session 2, I'd like to quickly recap and thank all of our panelists and MC from session 1. A big thank you to MC Dr. Greta Nance-Keller. A big thank you to Professor Kim from Korea University, Dr. Jeong, Director of Cybersecurity Industry Division in the Ministry of Science and ICT in Korea. Dr. Kim from the Cybersecurity Policy Research Department of the NSR's National Security Research Department at Korea. And last but not least, Ms. Michelle Mosey, Chief Operating Officer and the US lead for AustCyber. I trust that everyone's learned a great deal from their sharing and insights on national security and cyber policies. On to the next session. So my name is Laura. Just a real quick introduction. I work in the external engagement capacity for the School of ITEE. I also volunteer as national lead for the AWSN, which is the Australian Women in Security Network. And joining me today are a couple of panelists. Unfortunately, Jackie Lostow, who was meant to be part of this session, sends her apologies. She is unable to make it today, but we promise that we will be delivering some engaging content as part of this workshop as well. Before I begin, I wanted to quickly recap some discussion points around session 2. So today we are coming together to talk a little bit more about the diverse workforce in cybersecurity and why expanding the pipeline and why bringing more diversity into cybersecurity is a matter of national security. We're going to be exploring the commonalities and differences across genders in the field. And we will be knowledge sharing between Australia and Korea, some tips and tricks, and perhaps to break down the barriers that we currently face in the industry. The purpose of today's panel is to dig a little bit deeper into some of these themes and hear about the panelists' real-life experiences. So without much ado, I would like to introduce our panel members. So first, we've got Ms. Amy Roberts. Amy is the government lead and champion for Women in Cyber, an organizational coach and a champion of women in cyber and information security in Australia. You can see Amy up there on the screen. Amy leads the Women in Cyber program for the Australian Signals Directorate, part of the Australian intelligence community. She is an expert in women's leadership and well-being, and her mission is to empower leaders to create a healthy and inclusive cybersecurity industry. Amy was an advisor in the Office of Cybersecurity at the Departments of the Prime Minister in Cabinet and Home Affairs, and previously managed the Australian government's Stay Smart Online cybersecurity awareness raising campaign. She has 10 years of experience in cyber and 20 years in the private and public sectors as a small business owner, program manager, and policy advisor with a reputation for exceptional stakeholder engagement. Amy is an experienced program manager, a certified organizational coach, and a skillful public speaker and facilitator, who's passionate about lifting others up to become courageous and authentic leaders. Amy is a leader within the Australian Women in Security Network. We volunteered together, and she coordinated the first Thursday of the Month Club in Canberra. She's the founder of Lumen Coaching and a proud member of the Cyber Shift Alliance, tackling toxic workplace cultures. In 2019, she was named Australia's most outstanding woman in IT security in the Women in Security Awards and ranked in the top 20 cybersecurity professionals category of the IFSEC Global Influencers Security and Fire Awards 2021. And last but not least, we are also joined by Dr. Kwon, Eugene Kwon. Dr. Kwon is a senior researcher at KEPCO Research Institute responsible for cybersecurity and ICT research on distributed energy resource and power grid. KEPCO is the one and only utility company in Korea that owns generation, transmission, distribution, and customer side of electric power. Dr. Kwon is an international member of CYRA Working Group 2020 to 2023, Cybersecurity and Smart Grid, and the advisory member of US EPRI, the Electric Power Research Institute's Cybersecurity Task Force. She has work experience on R&D collaboration and external affairs, responsible for technical sales and commercialization of corporate research and development outcomes. Between 2017 to 2019, Dr. Kwon completed a global joint research project with the United States EPRI in the integration of NSM objects into an ISOC framework project. At the time, she moved to the US and worked with EPRI staff members in Knoxville, Tennessee, on her research. Dr. Kwon earned her PhD in engineering from the School of Information Security at Korea University. She is a delivery-driven professional with 13 years of international experience in a range of technologies, such as data and analytics, web search engine, gene allocation of bioindustry, and has various working experience at Samsung Electronics, Sun Microsystems, IBM, and US EPRI. Give a hand for our panel members today. Introduction, folks. But I guess we're jumping right onto it. This particular session is going to be a little bit different to session number one, in that we won't be having a lot of slides to present to the audience. It will be more of a Q&A session, in that we will have a conversation between Amy, myself, and Dr. Kwon, and hopefully people, if you have any questions, definitely raise your hands and let us know. So before we begin, I wanted to talk a little bit about the AWSN, which is the Australian Women in Securities Network, of which Amy and I volunteer. For those that are unfamiliar, AWSN was formed in 2014, and today we'd like to share a little bit about the vision of this, I guess, of our network, and why we believe in what we do, and why we believe this is such an important component of building the cybersecurity capacity in Australia. So in terms of the AWSN, I just wanted to quickly share our vision. We aim to increase the number of women entering and continuing and leading in Australia's security industry. We hope to connect with women of all ages, or female identifying professionals in the industry, all career stages within the security community, in person and online. Obviously, like most networking groups, since COVID, since we've had to take a hit over COVID, we've pivoted all of our catch-ups online, much like every other networking community here. And I think we're really proud of the fact that even though COVID had affected all of our in-person events, we have still been super active within each of our chapters. So as a network, AWSN is represented in pretty much all of the large states in Australia. And Amy obviously volunteers for Canberra, and I volunteer for the Brisbane chapter. And we hope to support women in every step of their career journey and inspire them to pursue a career in cybersecurity, and help retain that pipeline in terms of security professionals here. Just wanted to share the next slide as well, which is part of the challenges that we're trying to solve. It is a little bit lengthy, so I'll let that stay up there. Amy, I might just throw the first question to you. I guess in terms of being at the coalface of AWSN, you've sort of been at the coalface of the network, not just in your role as a chapter lead, but also in your current role with the ASD. Just a quick summary, like how would you describe how the industry has changed, or how has the landscape changed here in Australia in the past sort of 5 to 7 years since the inception of the network?
Thanks, Laura, and I'm honoured to be here with you all today. Thank you for having me. And I'm joining you actually from Narragaland in the southeast in New South Wales, near Canberra of Australia's Capital Territory. And as mentioned, I have a couple of hats, and that is working with in the Australian Signals Directorate, as well as with AWSN. And, I'm in one of those rare public-facing roles in the national intelligence community, in that I actually, do have the ability to get out and have a presence in the cyber industry and get involved with the community, and, in sponsoring events and activities, and keeping abreast of what's happening on the ground outside of the bubble of government, I guess. And one of the things that I have noticed since being involved with AWSN, and I've been involved since nearly the beginning, is the awareness about the need for diversity in our industry, and also just the amount of women that are actually interested and keen to be involved in cyber-related careers and security careers in general. I think one of the things that sadly I've noticed also is that despite all of the work that we've been doing and all of the amazing programs that organisations, including government, invest in, there hasn't been a massive shift in the actual participation rates of women in cybersecurity industry. So for a number of years, we were running at a quoted participation rate of about 11% in Australia. And that didn't shift for a number of years. And then in the last couple of years, there's been figures quoted by various organisations that are closer to 20%. Either way, it's still not gender parity. So I think that in recognising that the work that we're currently doing with empowering women and training and offering leadership opportunities, it's highlighted to me that there's actually deeper issues, and they're now becoming more and more well known, that we actually have a culture issue within cybersecurity, and there's a few initiatives also that I'm involved in that starting to address that. I can go into that in a little while and talk about some of the other programs you're investing in, but that's what I've noticed is that we need to do a bit of a step shift and up the ante on some of the activities that we're involved in, and increase the awareness of the types of issues that are preventing girls from choosing STEM subjects and women entering the industry. And if they enter the industry, what's preventing good quality professionals remaining in the industry?
Yeah, and that is pretty much, I guess I could, I'm not an academic myself, but academics in the room could probably concur in terms of their personal observation in terms of our sort of gender parity or lack thereof in terms of our university enrollments. I think one of the key observations that university professionals have seen is that the entry, we tend to get a pretty solid trend of interest in terms of enrollments from our female identifying students, girls coming through from high school. But at some point, in terms of at the point of graduation or even, getting into the workforce, we do see a little bit of that leaky pipe situation where they're obviously very qualified, but what exactly is kind of stopping them from going into the technical side? And is it something that we can address as a collective, not just from a female perspective, but obviously it's a big society issue. And Michelle Mosey in session 1 actually spoke about how important this is in terms of not just in diversity of gender, but diversity of thought. And that comes, with that sort of territory. I think society tends to use, phrases like soft skills, but it really should be power skills. And that's something that's an element that we really need to kind of focus on today. Now, I might throw the next question to Dr. Kwon. Dr. Kwon, if that's okay, can you tell us a little bit about how you got into cybersecurity and the ICT research field and what motivated you to stay driven in your role? I know, I guess for context for the audience, we've had a conversation with Dr. Kwon prior to this session, and we spoke about some of the cultural elements and cultural differences with South Korea. But Dr. Kwon, can you tell us a little bit about your story and what got you into the field of cybersecurity and ICT?
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Lola. So after my undergraduate in computer science major, I went to Samsung Electronics and saw many engineers with so many different areas of the IT and then communication and all those electronics. But I found out that without any specific area or specific technical backgrounds on computer science, what company decide you what to do. So in Samsung Electronics, for example, I saw many of the team or the organization or the projects were driven by the company, not by the engineer or the researcher there on their interest or their backgrounds. So that's when I first thought about, I need some specific area that it can be my weapon, and it can also be my strength that I can really go a little bit more deep into it. So I went back to my school and then started studying some of the algorithms and that's where I started learning on cryptography, and then
Cryptography, yeah.
yeah, and then my major moved to cybersecurity, and luckily I met Professor Lim, Jong-in-Lim, who had a presentation in the morning on session 1, and also Professor Kim. He was my supervisor as well. So with these two giant guru and then the big picture, I got quite an interest, and then I got quite some of the knowledge how I can calculate cybersecurity within the industry. Right now, I'm in the energy sector, and energy sector, some of you have not really familiar with it, but it's one of the very critical infrastructure that we need to protect within the national security. And the nuclear power plants and all those generations, substation, distribution, we have so many facilities, and those facilities have not really changed in digital life until like few years ago. And with many promising government projects and funds came into our energy sector, probably about recent 10 years, a lot of things changed with smart grid, microgrid, and smart city. Those projects lead a lot of energy sector into more digitalized and modernized. And cybersecurity issue just pops up whenever all those electrical equipment have changed with some like automated and control system and operating system connected to this field equipment. So many of the issues are just fascinating. Many of the interesting things we need to tackle on. So that's, I think, what my career has been resolved and developed in my 30 years, I guess.
No, that's fantastic, Dr. Kwon. Thank you for sharing. That's actually a really good segue to the next session. So session 3 of this particular workshop, we'll be discussing some critical infrastructure. And you're right, that element of critical infrastructure, obviously with a nation like South Korea, there's a lot that we can learn from that aspect. And one of the things that you highlighted just then in terms of answering that question about what motivated you to get into the career. You mentioned obviously some really, I'd use the word mentors, I guess. You were influenced by a couple of speakers that had, Professor Kim, for example, who appeared in session 1, which brings me to the next question, which I'd like to throw over to Amy. ASD has been a tremendous sponsor of AWSN's initiatives, especially and particularly this year in terms of, working on our security pathways program and also the mentoring pilot. And Amy, your work within ASD is especially unique, obviously. For those folks who are unfamiliar, ASD supports a range of programs to encourage women to pursue careers in STEM in Australia. And as I've mentioned earlier, they're a tremendous sponsor of AWSN funding programs such as the female-only AWSN Security Pathways program. Amy, question for you. What has been the most impactful project of your role in ASD? If you can, if it's even possible to kind of quote one, or, would you like to share with the audience some of the most impactful projects that you've had a chance to work on and had a chance to execute within your role in the ASD?
Sure, thanks, Laura, and thank you, Dr. Kwon. I love hearing your history and your journey. It's fascinating. If I could just give a little bit of background as well, if I may. So, for those not familiar with the Australian Signals Directorate, our core function is actually, there's 3 core functions of the Australian Signals Directorate. So it is a federal government department. It's a member of the national intelligence community, and our core functions are intelligence capability, which provide unique and actionable insights, offensive cyber, effects against malicious cyber actors, and also defensive cybersecurity through the advice and assistance of our Australian Cybersecurity Centre. So whilst the work that I do, which is outreach and program management and looking at industry and external facing activities, the reason that this is so important and the reason why Australian Signals Directorate has invested in organisations like AWSN is because we're living in this increasingly technologically advanced and interconnected world, and as tech and as technology and threats diversify, so too must our response, and that means that we need to understand the threat, which includes understanding human nature. And if we haven't got a diverse representation of people around the table assessing threats, making decisions, writing policies, and building products, we can't possibly expect to address and serve the very community that we're trying to represent if we haven't got all of those voices around the table. And I'd love to share with you one of my absolute favorite quotes, which inspires me to deliver the work that we do. And I'm just referring to my notes here, so forgive me, but I found this quote a couple of years ago, and it's actually by the former Verizon CIO, Judith Spitz, and she was commenting on a futurist, his name's Ray Kurzweil. She was commenting on his observation that technology is the evolution of human biology. And this goes to Dr. Kwon's point about talking about technology and all of the connected services that we have, that we all rely on. And every time I reflect on this, it reminds me why I do what I do and why diversity conversations are essential. She said, we're hurtling toward a time where our biology will be equal parts technology and physiology. And so think about the implications for the human race if that very technology that's destined to be the essence of who we are as a species is developed largely under the leadership and guidance of a single gender. And that to me is why, I've pushed for government for the last couple of years to recognise AWSN as the lead organisation for women in security in Australia, and to invest in organisations that are on the ground. So government doesn't need to be doing the doing, government needs to be empowering organisations that already exist. So to your question, what's the most exciting program? The most exciting stuff that I've worked on is actually this Women in Cyber program to date. I work in the diversity and inclusion team in ASD. So we also have our internal networks for our LGBTQI community, our Indigenous and Torres Strait Islander, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander networks. We have English as a second language. We have many communities. But the Women in Cyber work of matching women with mentors in the industry really excites me. And part of you mentioned some of the initiatives that the government invests in. And the reason that we do that is so that we can actually put role models in front of young women who are considering studying, or other women who are considering pivoting mid-career, or those that have perhaps had time out of the industry and want to turn around and come back in and think of a different career. There's a number of examples of programs where, and Michelle Mosey, is very familiar with the previous programs that have taken defence personnel, for example, and used their aptitude and trained them in cybersecurity and applied, people who are coming out of Australian, serving in the Australian Defence Force, and they're pivoting into cyber careers because they've got all those skills. So matching people with role models is really important. I think Project Friedman was a very exciting project that the government invested in. So Project Friedman is coaching over a 7 or 8 month period women specifically to talk on the cybersecurity conference circuit, to be able to stand up and confidently present in a TED Talk style manner about their particular area of expertise, and showcase that we do have a diverse array of expertise in Australia, because we have circumstances where the same people are asked to go on to conferences, therefore we end up with not as diverse an array of conference speakers as we could. So Project Friedman was an initiative of 2 women who were involved in the Australian Women in Security Network, and they recognised that if we train and give specific skills to women and then negotiate conference speaking spots on behalf of those women, then we're actually going to start to increase the presence of women on the cyber circuit, which again all comes back to role modelling. So with the mentoring platform that you mentioned, it was actually in 2019 that the Australian Prime Minister announced a significant amount of funding for a national cybersecurity workforce growth package. And it was recognising that we need many more people in Australia. It's obviously a worldwide issue, but we need many more people to tackle the coming threats to be able to stay abreast and maintain national security. And a portion of the $150 million that was committed to growing the workforce was actually for women in cybersecurity, which is what I manage through the Australian Signals Directorate. And again, recognising AWSN as a lead in this space, we have commissioned an organisation called OK Ready to develop a very specific online mentoring platform for AWSN, and it's AI-based values matching. So it goes just that one little bit step further than a standard mentoring arrangement where you might find someone who you think might be great in the industry that has a bit of your background and you have a discussion. We actually offer training for our mentors, and we offer lots of touch points for the mentees and the mentors that we connect through this platform to actually get skills in how to have conversations, how to, you know, make the most of an hour with a professional who is busy. But we also ensure that the mentors that are joining the program are very well aligned and aware of the reasons why we're running women's specific programs. And I guess we also, you know, try to make sure that the people that are particularly young students who are coming out of university, we want to make sure the people that they're talking to, that their first contact they have of someone in the industry is on board with, you know, all of the challenges and aware of all of the barriers that women face. So I couldn't pinpoint any one particular program, but certainly investing in the Australian Women's Security Network is, you know, really exciting.
That's a tremendous summary, Amy. And actually here at UQ, we've been a beneficiary of ASD directly as well through our Girls Do Cyber program with that great resource from ASD, the EXP program. And that's been, you know, such a benefit for us. And we've actually won an award through the Women in Security Awards for that particular Girls Do Cyber program as well, which is, yeah. And I guess I wanted to kind of, with all of that, with all of the projects that you've listed there, I think one element that that I would love to share with folks, especially on Zoom and in person here, is that I think it's really an important element for girls and females and, you know, women in security to be able to see what they can be. And you touched on that aspect really well. It's important for them to see themselves as a future leader in cybersecurity. Next question, I think I wanted to throw this to Dr. Kwon. Dr. Kwon, obviously you've been working in the industry, like you said, for over 10 years, so 13 years in the industry. Are you able to share some ways in which women in your industry, especially in, you know, obviously in South Korea, are making a difference in their workplace? Like, are you able to share any observations that you would like to share with the audience? Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Well, first, I want to emphasize on relationship, and everything is about people in the real world, in the industry. So whenever in the workplace, with the government, or with the other vendors, partners, it's all about people and the relationship. And I think female or women engineers have some strength over it to really care about people, listen to people, and then look for their needs. It's also something that we can do good and we can do better somehow. And one other thing I want to emphasize, it is about attitude, and especially in Korea, it makes people something different when they have some sincere or passionate attitude on things. And that's what I experienced when I have recently, I had an interview with the internship students in my company, and I see many young people with so many talents and so many knowledge, so many certificates or their grants they have achieved during their school days. But whenever they have the interview with the people they will probably be working together for a few years or a few months, somebody that differentiate with the others or those who have some very passionate and sincere and willing to do and willing to participate and get a lot of interest or the passion about things. So I want to emphasize on those two things that I experienced and then to meet with those people, and especially for the female engineer or the female researcher. It's always good to discuss things with the others and to really share about the issue or the problem they have at the moment. And I see some of the male engineers, for example, in my company, there is the very small smoking room, and it's always very crowded with so many male engineers taking a rest or taking time there. But yeah, I was wondering what kind of thoughts they share during the tiny room outside the building. But I heard from people that they just share their problems, issue, and their stressful work or tasks they need to complete. But those kind of really small talks are really making your company or the work life more enriched and then have more relationship with others. Those kind of things I haven't tried, but I really want to learn from those of the male engineers, I guess. Mhm.
Thanks for sharing that insight, Dr. Kwon. I can't say that it's similar here in Australia, unfortunately. I think smoking areas on our university or any other workplaces, unfortunately, we're quite, I've only ever identified one spot at the university. So it's a really interesting tidbit that you shared there, how people tend to bond in the smoking room and you know, kind of talk about their work problems, etc. I think one key takeaway there is that people need a safe space to talk about perhaps, you know, work issues or kind of knowledge share. And you know, I think that's definitely something that the network or AWSN and through ASD's funding is really trying to foster, that it's a safe space for people to really be themselves and to knowledge share and to maybe even kind of problem or troubleshoot, I guess, is for the lack of a better phrase. So that's a really interesting insight there in terms of the two different countries and how there is also that commonality of people needing a safe space to kind of share our knowledge, whether it be a work-related sort of, you know, insight or it could be, you know, something to do with your personal life and to talk with your colleagues in that respect. I'd like to touch on the next element here. I've got a list of questions here, but I might just kind of jump back and forth. Talking about workplaces and entire sort of organizations, one of the questions that I wanted to raise here, and this is directed at you, Amy, in your opinion, how can we foster or I guess persuade and introduce that sort of element or encourage our leaders to come on board with diversity and inclusion initiatives? Like, have you got any tips that you could share with us in terms of, yeah, encouraging our leaders to really embrace that?
Sure, thanks, Laura. I think that the biggest message that particularly government is, you know, leading with, and it's now well recognised in many parts of our sector, is that workplaces just miss out on the opportunities to build stronger workforces because of their biases. So including biases that you may not be aware about, such as, do we have a diverse workforce? Are we representing all of the voices in the community around the table? Like I said before, you know, are there representations from all nations that, you know, are involved, ages, gender, locations, you know, backgrounds? It's really critical, that awareness about that, and that takes a really honest look, you know, from the heads of organisations. It takes a certain vulnerability, so organisational vulnerability and self-awareness and organisational self-awareness to actually say, look around and say, well, there's obviously not a diverse workforce here. What part are we playing in this? As opposed to looking out and going, well, there's not enough girls coming through university, because there's issues that actually, are preventing growing more participation in the workforce by women. And these barriers are becoming well known. We mentioned earlier the cyber shift work that I've been doing. So just a really quick background, in recognition of the fact that there's many, many programs to empower women, but in actual fact, women don't need fixing. We have a culture issue. And a group of 8 of us in the industry, including Jackie from AWSN, who wasn't able to be here today, and myself and some other, incredibly amazing people that, I know in the industry, we all got together and decided to have a conversation. And the first part of that conversation was actually just giving a voice to people that have felt alone in the industry or have felt alone with regard to situations in the workplace where they may have been either bullied or ostracized or just generally not feeling at ease. So there's many, many spectrums to, poor culture in the workplace. And we held in July our inaugural panel discussion with the Cyber Shift Alliance. And that discussion was to look at how we can actually build great culture, and the fact that it does come down to leaders, but leaders across all levels. Leaders don't need to be the CEO or just those sitting around the boardroom, but those sitting around the boardroom do need to be able to listen with openness to the messages that they're getting from their staff. So some of the things that came out of that initial discussion, because we had workshops afterwards, after we had our panel discussion in July, and if anyone's keen to have a look, the website that we've just stood up is cybershift.com.au. And on there is actually a recording. Oh, thank you. So there's actually a recording of our initial panel discussion on the website. So the findings that came out of the workshops were, I was really fortunate to be in a group, leading a group that talked about what does great teamwork look like and what does a great culture look like. And the stuff that came out of that was that, team leaders demonstrating trust, respect, and kindness have a vision. And that vision will be followed by, people in the organisation. That formal and informal, meetings to support each other are important, particularly in times of COVID. People can feel, left all alone and trying to prove that they're soldiering on, and find it hard to reach out and say, hey, I actually need help. I need to connect with them. It's up to leaders to actually acknowledge and reach out and ask the questions. And also a team needs to be a safe environment. So to, the discussion, with Dr. Kwon and you earlier, you need safe spaces, and it doesn't need to be, anything particularly, hippie. I've worked with a lot of women's groups where there are safe spaces, but in terms of organizational safe spaces, that's basically, an environment where there's no micromanaging, new ideas are welcomed, and everybody is treated with respect. So simple things in an organizational meeting, is somebody else able to chair the meeting rather than the leader always taking the lead? If there's someone who isn't contributing for whatever reason, giving them an opportunity to have a voice and inviting them to actually speak. I think that's, great team culture. Participants also identified that there needs to be rules to lead great culture. So inclusive communication is the key to one of, to one of those. So classic example, working in defence, when I first, was around the defence industry a couple of years, or even just coming into government, acronyms rule the world. You can't have a conversation where 16 acronyms don't actually appear in the sentence. And it's really exclusive. So if there are grads who have come around, or new people entering the industry, or someone returning to the workforce after a period of time, particularly for women if they've been off, managing family or aging parents or some caring capacity, it's really exclusive, and not everybody's going to feel comfortable saying, excuse me, what's that acronym stand for? Because then you'd be throwing your hand up every 30 seconds. So inclusive communication, compassion and kindness create psychological safety, supporting diversity in an organisation, recognising that if you've got groups of people that wish to, recognise and celebrate particular days of the year that highlight, their culture and their background, make it a part of work on work time, because to actually allocate a half an hour of work time to an event which makes people feel included, the productivity gains from that are absolutely untold. And supporting one another. We spend so much time with our colleagues that I spend more time with my colleagues when we're in the workplace normally. At home it's different at the moment, but we spend more time with our colleagues than we do with our actual family, and we extend compassion and kindness and caring to our friends and our family. But often in the workplace, there's this sense we have to be super professional and be neutral and not show any emotion. Well, it's really important that we actually show people kindness and compassion, particularly, as I said before, coming out of COVID and moving back into an environment which can be really daunting and create quite a lot of anxiety for many people. All of that leads employees to feel safe, people wanting to go to work, a sense of positivity and a sense of belonging. So simple, easy, cheap, no resource, things that people can implement is just that. Ask the question, am I doing everything I can as a leader to make my people feel safe and as though they want to be here? Because if they don't want to be there and they're turning up with, angst and anxiety and not being able to bring their whole selves to work, then the bottom line gains of the organisation not going to be met. And it has been shown through research that organisations that have greater diversity are actually economic leaps and bounds ahead of other organisations.
Thank you, Amy. That's a really important element. And I love that both you and Dr. Kwon had, emphasize on what I quoted earlier, power skills, that ability to communicate effectively, and that, I guess that stereotype of being able to kind of relate to individuals at that level. And that's certainly something that we see is a crucial element of what makes females and women in the industry a little bit different perhaps to our male counterparts. I'm just conscious of the time, so I will throw one last question both to you, Dr. Kwon. I might start with you and then to Amy. To wrap things up and to open up the floor to some questions, what is the one piece of practical advice that you would give to young women entering our male-dominated industry, such as cybersecurity and ICT? If there is one practical advice from you, Dr. Kwon, what would that be?
Thank you, Lola. Well, one piece of advice I want to encourage young women engineers and young women researchers. Be very courageous and be ambitious, and you're doing the right thing, and you have a lot of potential to investigate on your future. So just never give up and just give it a try, and it will be all yours to explore the world of the cybersecurity.
So don't be afraid and stay ambitious. What about you, Amy? Do you have one key advice that you might like to impart to our young females entering the industry?
Exactly everything Dr. Kwon said. And you're really stretching me trying to nail it down to one, because I could bang on about this for hours. But I think back yourself. The one thing that I would say to women of all ages, back yourself. And I'm going to be cheeky and throw in a part B to that. So there still sounds like one tip. When you're talking to people, when you're trying to seek a mentor, when you're wanting to reach out and ask for someone's advice, know that if they've offered themselves as a mentor, then they're offering you their time. A lot of young women particularly, but a lot of people generally feel a bit nervous about taking up a mentor's time, or feel a bit nervous contacting a role model and saying, oh, would you mind to back yourself, and know that if they've put themselves out there as a mentor or as a role model, they're there to help you, and they're going to want to give you the time. So backing yourself means being really firm about what you want from a question or a relationship with somebody, being really succinct about asking for that, and ask for what you want. The worst thing that can happen is someone will say no. And there's worse things that have happened, than someone saying no. So you find the next person that is right for you. So I think that's what I would say. And again, doing cheeky, if you are in an interview, if you're in an interview situation, ask an organisation what its diversity and inclusion policies are. How does it support staff, and what's the flexibility in the organisation like? Because if they have policies, they'll be on their website. If they are not quite mature, they will be thinking about it. If they're not thinking about it, if they don't have an answer, the chances are it may not be the right organisation for you if they're of high value to you.
I think that's a great practical advice, Amy, and especially in 2021, after what we've kind of had to face in terms of COVID, and it's a really crucial question to ask, I think, in terms of flexibility and what organizations are focusing on in terms of diversity and inclusion. And I think that's a really, really great advice. Thank you so much, Amy and Dr. Kwon. I might just open up, I'm conscious of the fact that I've got 5 minutes. I might just open up the floor to some questions if people have got some questions for us. I'm just going to monitor the chat as well. Otherwise, we'll be sharing some of this information that we've shared on here via some slides, I think, as a follow-up.
Actually, I have a question.
Yeah,
Can I just talk, or do we need to come there?
I think if you just talk and then I will
Yeah,
repeat the question,
absolutely.
if that's okay. Yeah.
Well, thanks very much for the presentation. My question was more around something that Amy has already mentioned a little bit in terms of I'm actually running a project on understanding how we can kind of break some barriers for women into the cybersecurity profession. And if you want to save me a little bit of time of work and give me some ideas on solutions on how we could do that, with one caveat, raising awareness and improving culture is not allowed as an answer. So if we can talk about some low-hanging fruits, because I mean, it's certainly going to be part of the solution, but if we can talk about some low-hanging fruits or something practical and super specific, thank you.
Can you hear that, Amy? You're nodding.
Yeah, so I think the question was, other than culture issues, what are some practical? So is this for an internal program or for attracting? Sorry, I missed that bit.
Yeah, it's more for attracting, I would say.
Attracting
women in the cybersecurity profession. Yeah.
Sure. So I would say that if there are opportunities for workplace flexibility, I know you said not to answer with an answer about culture, but I think that offering different ways of working is really important. So I use the example of a training course, for example. So if an organization was offering a training course, and traditionally it was face-to-face 5 days to come to Canberra, for example, to do the training course, that's actually quite exclusive because not a lot of people can leave their caring responsibilities for 5 days straight to come to a training opportunity. I guess the same goes in the workplace. If there are teams that are being established to tackle really, really exciting projects, are there other ways of doing that rather than having everybody come together for 4-hour workshops, in one place? I think that other ways of attracting are to talk about in looking at your recruitment. So another issue that we have in cybersecurity is the way we talk about our industry. So I do not have the link on me, but we can certainly share it afterwards. But there is actually it's like a de-gender coder, but you can actually run your recruitment ad through a lens. It's an online service. You can run it through the lens and see if it's actually got more masculine or feminine, traditionally masculine or feminine language around it. And from memory, some of the really strong language that tends to attract a more masculine audience is, leader, unicorn, star, all these kinds of, tackle, attack, they're very traditionally, solo, singular, charge ahead as the champion and the unicorn in a team. More inclusive language such as, community building, capacity building, which can still be from a highly technical, perspective, doesn't need to be, communications roles, for example. But I think that making sure that your ads are actually genuinely inclusive in the language, and the images that we use to project about the industry. So, if you're going along to, I'm not sure how you're attracting, but if you're going along to a careers fair, for example, and you pull up your banner and your banner is black and blue and has green screen, green code running down a screen, got a picture of someone in a hoodie hunched over a keyboard in a basement, that drives me spare. That is not what our industry is about. Hackers can look like all of us here on the screen as much as they can look like the guy in the hoodie in the basement. So in projecting an image of what cybersecurity industry is, it needs to project what everybody looks like, including the threat actors as well as the people that provide solutions. If you can't see yourself in a role, then you're not going to apply for it. So the language that I read and the pictures that I see on that organization's website, on its banners at conferences, ads, things, Instagram, LinkedIn, or whatever social platforms you use to promote your organization, if the imagery is inclusive, and government's just as much, we're not perfect at this either. And I'm constantly picking up different things we do in our own organization going, yeah, can't put that up there. It's not inclusive. So imagery is everything, imagery and words.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you.
Thanks, Amy.
Have we got another
Pleasure.
question from the audience? Yeah, I've got one question here from the audience, Amy.
I guess when I look inwards, I just recently switched just a semester to computer science from a much more female represented area.
Welcome to computer science.
Yes. I don't feel really any concern about entering what I know is a much more male dominated field.
Yeah.
Realistically, should I have a little bit more trepidation? How bad is it?
Did you hear that, Amy? I think that's a really important attitude to have. I've just kind of gone straight into it, but the question from the panel here or from the floor here is, she's a female student or a female identifying student. She's recently swapped from a non-computer science area into computer science. She's moved into the field without really thinking without really kind of thinking of the gender imbalance as an issue, but is it something that she should have a bit more of a hesitance about? And kind of my flex there is no, you should not be put off by that or think that you need to have more of a cautious approach. Would you concur, Dr. Kwon, Amy? I think you both spoke about being brave, staying ambitious. I think that's quite, that's definitely a message that we would like to convey to young students that are in the field. Would you both agree?
Would Dr. Kwon like to answer first?
Yeah, Dr. Kwon, would you like to answer that? Is there any advice for one of our female students who just recently transferred into computer science? Is there anything that she should be concerned about being in a more male-dominated study area?
Welcome and hello world. And there are a lot of things I think she can learn and then to explore in this area. So whatever area she finds, it's gonna be a lot of job position out there, and she will find interesting. Okay.
Yeah, so I mean, computer science is obviously such a strong, portfolio, and it opens up your doors to plenty of, plethora of career opportunities. So I think that attitude that you just have is great to have, and keep that because I think that's what we need with the younger generation. So with that, I'm 5 minutes over, so I will wrap things up. Thank you so much, Dr. Kwon and Amy. It's been lovely to chat with the both of you, and I hope that folks have benefited from our conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you, Dr. Kwon. Thank you. We'll take a quick 5-minute break before the next session. Thank you, everyone.